Hello, everybody. This is NGO Soul and Strategy, and this is Tosca. Let me give you a little bit of background what we're doing today. Several confederated or federated INGOs have lately, well, actually in the last 10 years or more, focused heavily on expanding their Southern organizational membership. CARE is one example, Save the Children, Plan International, Oxfam, ActionAid, you name it. What's it like for an NGO country program or country office to transition to being a full member, a full affiliate? What kind of change management and change leadership approaches do we need to use in that scenarios? What kind of risks do we need to look out for? And how can we make sure that the results of gaining more Global South members and becoming a full member, as we're going to discuss, actually live up to the expectations, both of the new full member as well as of the broader organization? And does local civil society and government actually see your new entity in its new identity as a credible member of local civil society, instead of perceiving you still as potentially crowding out the space for local civil society? Hazem Fahmy is in a very good position to speak to all of this. He is can I say this in a moment? I'm going to ask you, Hazem, the former country director of CARE Egypt, and CARE Egypt is now becoming the CARE Egypt Foundation. So let me start by welcoming you, Hazem.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be with you today.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure for me to have a pre-conversation with you. And I realize I need to first ask you a basic question. What is right now your title? Where are we exactly in the transition in that sense?
We have completed the transition. So just CARE in Egypt have just been accepted as a full member. January of 2022. And my current title is the CEO of CARE Egypt Foundation.
You are the CEO of CARE Egypt Foundation, right? And just to finish on your bio in brief, so before this, I imagine you were the country director for CARE Egypt's program, is that correct?
Correct.
Yes. You also have worked at CARE Egypt for a much longer duration, for as much as about 19 years. And you have a PhD from New Mexico University here in the US in water resources. So Hazem, I think we need to start by me asking you, tell us briefly about the history of the CARE Egypt program and country office within the CARE Confederation to ground us all.
Sure. CARE in Egypt was established as a country office by CARE USA back in 1954. So by now we're looking at over 60 years of existence in the country. Yeah. We have been operating as a country office and we've changed what we've been doing in terms of the way we do development, the kind of programs that we approach. Our own approach has been also moving along with the ecosystem of development. So we started by giving charity and humanitarian aid, but some of the major changes started in the late 90s, early 2000s, when in CARE Egypt, we started to look at rights-based approaches.
I see.
Probably the next big move or change happened around 2007, 2008, where CARE in Egypt was one of 8 pilots around the CARE world to shift from a project mode of operation to a program long-term programming mode of operation. And since then, we have established 3 programs, which are current 3 programs, by the way. 1 program in women's rights, another one is in agriculture, and the third one is in education.
Okay.
And in each of those programs, we have an impact group that we are claiming and we're trying to affect their lives positively. We do the analysis, we try to get to the root cause of what is keeping that impact group from fulfilling their potential. We go as deep as we can in those analyses, and that then informs how we design our projects and how these projects can together interlock towards a 10-year goal or a 15-year goal for each program.
Okay. I love how you immediately kind of set out the big kind of paradigm shifts, such as from humanitarian and charity towards rights-based approaches. As we know, CARE globally accepted or adopted a rights-based approach quite a while ago. So from your perspective, since you've been in the middle of helping CARE Egypt as a country office, as a program evolve towards a full independent member of CARE globally, what's behind CARE's wish to garner more Global South-based full members?
I think there is a realization that if we are to be true to the way we present ourselves, that we have an unshakable commitment to ending poverty, that we are a global force in the development ecosystem, that cannot continue to be the old colonial way of how international organization used to look like, and for the greater part, a lot of them continue to look like today. And so there is that realization that we need to harness the energy, the know-how of our global membership. And we work in 90-some countries worldwide, but a lot of them are country offices that have a lead member that manages them. So there is a notion that we need to, for example, like CARE in Egypt, we have been in Egypt since 1954. We want to, even when we work with Egyptian organizations, we always talk about sustainability, we always talk about exit. So if you're not practicing that with your own offices, you're not maturing them enough or to the level that you can count on them as peers, then we are not staying true to what we preach. So that was the primary driver for a number of years now. It's not a new thing, but
no,
about that for sure.
A long time already, yes. So do you consider this strategic direction to be valuable and a necessary one under all circumstances for CARE to evolve many of its country programs towards Global South members or full members, or only under certain scenarios?
I think it's valuable regardless, because I can tell you I've been in this with CARE for some time now. And even when I look back at the kind of discussions that we have at the National Directors Committee, which is part of the governance of CARE International, the kind of agenda items that we have on the table, the kind of discussions are shifting by the mere fact that there are more we present and we talk about what matters to where we are working in the South. So, and that is influencing what kind of topics we're talking about. It's not 100% transformation or change, right, but certainly when you compare where we are now from where we used to be even 6 years ago, it's very different.
That's really interesting. I'd like to probe a little bit. So you say that what you talk about in the Committee of National Directors has changed because of having more Global South-based full members. Give me an example of a topic that is now discussed that wasn't discussed before.
I'll tell you something that is related also to our own transformation. As part of CARE accepting us to be in the membership in the confederation, there is certain expectation, and you're saying, well, viability, standards of programming, quality, blah, blah, these kind of things. So we have said, well, that's fine. We can think and work with you on that. And I imagine we may want to talk about that a bit later. But we said, if you're going to do that to accept us as members in the Confederation, how about existing members? Are we examining them in the same way?
A good point.
And we pushed a little bit, and it's not necessarily because only we've pushed. I think there is a realization that if we're asking this of new members, we should be also questioning if existing members are doing those, are living up to the same standards or not. And we've always had standards that were sort of measuring our work, measuring our value in the organization through, but these are becoming more and more central part of how we interact with one another. And we have an accountability dashboard that we are working at. It's not to the point where if you don't live up to that level, to that target, that you will be banned or expelled from the organization. We're not that tough yet, but certainly we've made it clear that if that's going to be part of us being admitted into care, that should also be part of existing in care for the long term.
Touché. Yes, very good point. Can you say something about when the Global South member basically said in the National Directors Committee, but what about you, Global North members? What was, if you take a step back, what was one area of these standards that are expectations put upon Global South new members that actually a number of Global North members have difficulty living up to themselves?
I don't know if a number of them or not, but certainly the financial viability, for example, funny enough, that a lot, although that the perspective on that itself also matured. Now it's different from where we started a few years back. But financial viability, demonstrating that you have enough reserve for operational cost for a number of months, and that you have diversity of donor base and stuff like that. And I believe that because of the economic conditions in the world right now, some of our care member partners have faced difficulty lately. And it was not the Southern new members that have faced that difficulty yet. Or we can argue that we are not on par yet in terms of being financially completely viable or at the same level of portfolio. But funny enough, those who have faced troubles lately have not been from the South, have been actually from Northern members.
Interesting.
There's one area that
yeah, it's a good example. And actually, I was going to ask you about the kind of expectations that CARE globally puts upon its new full members, but you have already answered that. So let me move on. Do you think, actually, no, let me dive in a little deeper on that issue of expectations and standards. Are they the ones that the global CARE organization at first put upon what is now the CARE Egypt Foundation? Were those expectations the right ones? Are they reasonable and realistic?
I think they were the right ones, because a lot of it was not very stringent. Let me be frank about that. It was making sure that we're going to subscribe to the vision, we're going to subscribe to the safeguarding policies, the values, and that our programming is going to be in line with the wider CARE vision and direction. And because we have been a country office, because we have been developing those programs already under that umbrella, so it was not a difficult task to fulfill. It was not that difficult at all. Some of the, like the financial viability, and I was talking about a second ago, that in itself have matured over the years, because they wanted us to be financially viable on day one of membership. And now there is a recognition that We may continue to get support from existing bigger members. It comes in a different form as we maturing to become more of a peer. So there is less expectation in terms of how financially viable we have to be on day one, as long as we are showing that we are moving in that direction and there is a steady progress in becoming financially viable. So it's not, and it became more important to make sure that the program quality is in place and it's remaining, and you're also that you're achieving the impact that is equally, if not more important than being financially viable.
Yeah, interesting. Yes, and it's my sense amongst CARE's peer organization that realization on the financial viability, that this is a more longer term process, has been shared by others as well. But really interesting what you said earlier about that some of the Global North members actually themselves have difficulty living up to that at times. So as you said in the introduction, CARE USA was what CARE calls the lead member that used to oversee the Egypt country program. CARE USA is also by far the largest member of the CARE confederation globally. Its size has always been much bigger than that of any of the other members. How has that relationship between what is now the CARE Egypt Foundation and CARE USA had to evolve, or probably still is evolving, in order to signal and manifest becoming co-equals?
On a very practical level, we've registered our CARE Egypt Foundation back in 2018. We became members, like I said, in January 22. So few years lapsed between the actual registration and being an actual member. And in between, and that we have negotiated and worked on with CARE USA, that the portfolio of the country office will start to decline in terms of we're not take any new projects under the CARE country office license, and start to direct new business, so to speak, under the CARE Egypt Foundation. So that one starts to grow while another one starts to fulfill its commitments to its donors.
Yeah.
To the point where we are actually 0-1 out and one becomes in full 100% of existence. So that was the arrangement. They were quite flexible in doing that, even shifting the cutoff date, because at some point, because we were not ready with all our policies, with all our systems, so we had a great opportunity that we did not want to lose. So we said, well, rather than take that under the CARE Egypt Foundation, let us please take one more thing under the country office license. So the general agreement was for one to slow down, phase out, I should say, and another one to build up. And they supported us significantly in that. The other thing they did, and they continue to do for a while, which is to oversee our business plan, our business model, our journey to build that new organization. And they provided technical support, and they were actually the sponsor of our membership request or ask. So they played quite a role in not only accompanying us to the point where we are asking for the membership, but actually in presenting the ask to the various circles in CARE International.
Nice, nice. Still, let me probe a little bit at the informal level, right? When we think about behaviors and practices, right? To underpin such a now co-equal relationship, probably, have there been any issues that you feel from your perspective where informally things needed to be renegotiated or difficult conversations need to be had? I don't know if you feel comfortable talking about that, but if you can say something even at a high level, I think it's very salient for our audience.
I'm fairly comfortable talking about that. Like, for example, we registered, like I said, in March 2018. We come to an agreement of that phase out and build up, by which we are able to actually use the brand, sign up for new projects under Courageous Foundation. We've only done that a year afterwards, and in between, we've been talking about all sorts of legal aspects, assets, moving of assets, transfer of assets, closing of accounts, a lot of things of that nature that are fairly legal, fairly practical, but until you iron them out, you cannot really start new business.
Yeah.
So that took much longer than it should. I don't think it was anyone's bad intention. It's just the reality. We're one in 40 some countries they are working with. So you get your role and you wait your turn. And sometimes when you arrive to an agreement, but you arrive at it with a certain level, then it needs to be signed off by a higher rank. Then that starts to ask more questions, start to consult another person. So you find yourself going around and rehashing things that have already been talked about. So we've been through that a few times.
Yeah.
But ultimately, we still managed to go through it.
Okay. Yeah, and this sounds largely as very.
And I can give you another example of difference between working with intentions and the reality on the ground. Because a lot of people, we have been registered, so we are taking new projects under the Courageous Foundation, which means that we can get a share of the overhead, or what we call ICR.
Yeah.
And even after we have established how to do that, sometimes we often go back and renegotiate that in new opportunities, or some staff that are either new or have not been part of earlier conversations, they still think and treat us or write us and talk to us like we're still a country office. So you find those things. It has, like, the new reality has not sunk in yet in all circles.
Right, and that is indeed what I was asking about. That at the very least, that takes some time, some adaptation. Yeah. So let's talk now about what you learned about change leadership and change management in the process of leading Care Egypt Foundation towards this full membership. And as you know, change management is such a huge field, right, of practice. If you now take a step back, what have you found most rewarding about leading Care Egypt Foundation towards this new identity?
Two things. One, when I finally create buy-in with a group of my colleagues or few of them, and a year or two after we start the conversation, or now, like, for example, a few months back, a colleague of ours came to me and said, well, I really now applaud that we had that vision that early on, 6 or 7 years back, because we are in a position now to we're in a strategic place to play a different role and be a different organization. And despite the fact that we were resisting it or not understanding it 6 or 7 years ago, it's now sunk in that we're really doing something good, and so it's, in a way, it validated that vision.
It validated, yeah.
So that is extremely rewarding, for sure.
Yeah.
The other thing, and I took a personal pride in this, is I think one of the bigger changes, at least in my own mindset, and I hope that our board is seeing it this way, and I know for the most part they do, is that yes, we are part of the Care International family. We have commitments toward that, but our primary liability, our primary accountability, I should say, is towards the Egyptian public. And so in the past, when we talk about this, we talk about working or being accountable to our beneficiaries. Now we're talking about being accountable to the Egyptians in more general terms.
In general, yeah.
And to me, that is both a responsibility, but also rewarding at the same time when we are able to actually achieve it.
Yes, yes. And I absolutely want to ask you about that in a moment. But before we go there, what it looks like, right? That accountability towards the broad Egyptian public. Let's first still talk a little bit. When you and I had our pre-conversation, you were keen to reflect on some mistakes that you feel you've made in the process. And when I say you, it's not necessarily, Hazem, just you as the CEO of Care Egypt Foundation, but it may well have been an approach that your team, especially those who are directly reporting to you, and you shared. So what are some of, let's talk about maybe 2 mistakes that you feel you've made, and what did you learn from those?
Sure. The first one had to do with how we viewed the entire journey. And it started with the requirements that CARE International have asked of us to be vetted and to be accepted as a candidate for membership. And at the time, they asked us for a business plan. So we started by, well, if that's the requirement, we fulfill the requirement. We developed a business plan. However, it just became a thing that started to mushroom out of control, because it made it appear and work almost like we're doing a project of transformation rather than a new existence, a new form, a new business model, a new everything almost. So treating it like a project was making us talk about resources, spending resources, being late, being on time, creating risk matrix. I remember we tried to print that at one point, and it was the size of a small carpet when you piece those together. It was just became basically a paralysis. We were really bogged down with stalling because of that. And funny enough, it was CARE USA who challenged us at that moment and said, well, you guys have lost what is fun about this. You lost why are we doing all this? So we stopped and reflected, and rather than worry about the plan and the tasks, we started to think a bit big picture. What is the new business model should look like? What is the value proposition? Where are added value to the Egyptian public or the Egyptian ecosystem or the regional parts of care or even the global care? And when we made that shift, it made more sense. Things became the ambiguity, the toughness, all the difficulties became more tolerable because you can sort of ground them in that big picture. You know what the North Pole is, and as long as you're making progress toward that, then your tactics and your movement are still in the right direction, even if they are not. Even if they are a month late, who cares? It's not that we're talking about 3 or 4 year things. Who cares about a month? Or if you're over budget or under budget, that it doesn't matter much in the grand scheme of things.
Right. Interesting. So that was the first realization. And what is the second one? And there's probably more. And you're currently writing a blog post that you've agreed to publish along with this podcast episode. So we're going to be sure to link the two for our audience. So what is a second mistake?
A second one had to do with my own comfort of telling our staff what will be different versus what will be the same. And trying to calm their fears about how changed their life will become. I was hanging on to, we have 3 programs, we'll continue to have 3 programs. We are having these set of donors, we'll continue to have the same set of donors. So I was overemphasizing what will remain the same and downplaying the things that will be different, the different systems, the different regulatory agencies that we'll have to work with, that we have a new board, the board will be part of our governance system. And that made it a bit more difficult for people to accept those realities when they started to kick in.
I see. So the implication of that was that when those changes kicked in, then people said, whoa.
That's not what we subscribed for, or not to that level of change. And it's still, we're still learning, by the way, we're still adjusting to the new systems, whether it is the Egyptian regulatory agency requirements or the new governance now that you have work with the board, and they still look at very strategic things, but we're not the sole decision maker or taker of our own destinies. We have a new group that we need to convince them and ask for the support for many of our major initiatives.
Yeah. What was it in you think that made you initially want to emphasize what would remain the same rather than also being proactive in communicating what would be different?
I think it was wanting to not leave people behind. I wanted to because it's never going to be just the group of senior managers that will do the transformation.
Right.
So more layers and more circles within the organization have to pitch in and do their part. So wanting people to not be ordered to do things, but to be owning to the new task, because it was tough, it was a lot of work. So wanting them to be part of that, I found myself not consciously enough trying to downplay what will be different so that they more accepting of becoming part of that journey as well.
Understood. Yeah. And I'm sure there are other things that you also learned in the process. And again, you'll expand on those in your blog post. Is there something, and I'm looking at the time, is there something that you can say about what you learned in terms of change communications?
It's a constant thing. It's a never-ending thing. And it's a cliche, probably a lot of people would say that and know that, but to know it is one thing, and to actually feel it and live it is another thing.
Absolutely. And this is very commonly the experience. And by the way, almost every leader that I have ever talked to or interviewed or have had in a senior leadership program talking about the change, the organizational change that they helped lead, says, I under-communicated to a person.
And the other thing about that as well is knowing or sort of realizing that one form of resisting the change sometimes comes across as, well, we don't understand, so tell us more or explain more. Although it has been explained in a very clear way, at least to the way I think of it, but because they're not quite convinced yet, so they come back with more questions or asking for more clarity. So also not getting frustrated about repeated questions and realizing that that is the way people digest things, that it takes a bit more time. And it's not necessarily because of lack of clarity, but it's just that they want to make sure that I always tell, even if we talk about the same topic from a different angle, that I remain consistent also.
Oh, yes.
So under communicating is one, not getting frustrated when we get repeat questions. And if you're not making things up, the consistency parts will come natural, but that is something reflecting back on some of the questions. I feel like people were unconsciously hoping that I become inconsistent at one point. And this, we told, but no, I think we were quite honest and consistent in what we knew and we did not knew, what we did not know.
And also what you don't know, right?
Yeah, exactly. More so than what we knew.
Yeah, especially at a moment in time, right?
Precisely.
Yeah. Now let's talk a little bit about this whole strategic direction by a number of INGOs to garnering more Global South membership. There has been some pushback to the notion that by becoming more globally balanced in membership, that INGOs would gain more legitimacy as well as credibility at the country or regional level. And that pushback is coming not just from certain academics and analysts, but also from parts of global South civil society who say, no, you're not becoming more legitimate as a, let's say, CARE Egypt Foundation, and you're still pushing us, you're still crowding us out, right? So how do you, I realize that CARE Egypt Foundation is only in the, it's now just been over a year, as you told us, that you are fully established as independent member. How is CARE Egypt Foundation now perceived by Egyptian civil society now that you are independent?
It depends on which part of civil society. If you're looking at the small community-based organization that we worked with in the past, we're still more or less the big organization that we work with them and partner with them in grants and stuff like that. So that much of it, they don't feel like we're crowd, at least that's my perspective, that we're not necessarily crowding them as much as that we are sort of a vehicle for them to program and have more opportunities to work. If you go to the national level, and that's quite a bit of jump, but anyway, if you go to the national level, we're really a much smaller player than a lot of the national Egyptian NGOs. Their budget, a lot of them are charity-based organizations, but some of them are also becoming more and more working more and more in development, not just charity, not just humanitarian assistance and stuff like that. And for these guys, we are a very small player, but we're a very small player with international access. So they like and they admire that we have access to know-how, that we have access to standards, but we're not crowding them. They're accepting us as a new baby, a new kid on the block, rather than feeling that we are threatening them in any way.
So you haven't had as an entity, haven't had reaction, I'm just making this up now, right? But where some might say, well, you're pretending to be local, but you still have so much protection from the global organization, not just access to resources, maybe, and probably finance, but also protection in terms of when we have to take up contentious stances within Egyptian Egyptian society, it's easier for you to talk, that kind of rhetoric.
Yeah. See, I don't believe we are completely local, to be honest. I mean, I think we're a new breed. We have a dual citizenship. We're Egyptian, but we are part of an international organization at the same time. That brings privileges in terms of access to resources, access to know-how. I honestly don't think it brings protection. I differ on that one.
You do?
Because I've always maintained that we are working despite being international, not because of being international. Because ultimately, we have to abide by the law. It's not really, I don't feel, at least not in the last 8 or 9 years of our work, we have always maintained open book and open relationship with our government counterparts, and they were accepting us back then and they are accepting us now. I don't feel any heightened level of protection as a result of being part of CARE International versus being an Egyptian organization.
Interesting. And I was actually going to ask you, have you noticed any shift in attitude, in tone of Egyptian government as a very important stakeholder, whether it's at the local level or at the national level, in CARE Egypt Foundation making this transition?
A lot of it has been quite positive in terms of we now get invited to more discussions, things that will not necessarily be very natural for an international organization to become part of. So the number of conversations and tables we get invited to now, we have more seats at more conversations, and we get asked of our know-how and our work more often or with easier ways than it used to be in the past.
And why do you think that is?
Because we are Egyptian, we are under the Egyptian regulatory framework. So any apprehensions or trust issues are slightly less now. Now, mind you, like I was talking about, we have very good relationship back then, and we continue to do that. And I believe that's a lot of our credibility comes from long-term relationships, being an open door, open book organization. But now that we're also operating under that framework, it's easier for them to accept us and invite us in conversations that will take a couple of red tapes, approvals before they ask an international organization to come to be part of.
That's real value, right? That is really valuable.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. So again, now that you're, let's say, on the other end of this journey, as you said, this change journey, if you now could comment for a moment finally on what are still the biggest obstacles that stand in the way of CARE globally gaining that greater diversity of Global South members, whether these obstacles are tactical or operational, whether they're strategic, or whether they are related to organizational culture. So for those who come after you, and any thoughts that come to mind?
You're asking me from the CARE Confederation perspective,
yes,
or from within the CARE? Okay. For the CARE Confederation, I believe the biggest thing is the way to transform or increase the membership cannot be one size fits all. It cannot be only country offices transforming to become affiliates or to become candidates.
Okay.
And I believe that's a great test to CARE generally, is that if we go somewhere where there is no country office, and you're asking national NGOs to become part of your confederation,
right?
Why would they join? What's in it for them? What will be the added value that will bring so that people are convinced to be part of that global organization? And it cannot be just resources. And what they're going to have to give up in return to be part of an organization. So I think the biggest thing is that the diversification of the additional memberships, that it cannot be only country offices, that is still an open chapter in the CARE history in a way.
I see. That's interesting. It was my understanding, but that might be out of date, is that CARE explicitly is also entertaining, in principle, interested to entertain new Global South-based members that are not country offices or country programs, that are independent civil society organizations or other entities. Is that not in play at the moment?
It's in play, but it's yet to happen.
Okay.
And I think it sort of puts more questions, and it puts us, it challenges us as to why these organizations want to join.
Yeah, what's
and to be fully assimilated and accepted, and so it's in discussion. We've been working on it. There are a couple of places where there's missions that are actually looking for for organizations to join us. But I think it's going to be a very different dynamic once some of those guys start to join. Already, like I was talking earlier, the dynamics are shifting as a result of more members from the South are around the table. And I think the greater change will come when non-country transformed members start to join us as well. I think that will be even a bigger change.
Yes, including, and we'll have to leave it on the speculation, but I would argue the infusion of different organizational cultural characteristics might be stronger if independent organizations are joining CARE. In principle, at least one could argue that. boy, and that would make for a whole different new.
It would certainly, sorry to interrupt you, but it would certainly make what was very easy for us to make sure that we are aligned with the vision, we are aligned with the values. It's not gonna be an impossible task, but certainly will be not as smooth because as someone who has already been operating in the organization for tens of years.
Of course, super interesting. We have to leave it at that. So I'm going to ask you, Hazem, where can people find out more about you? Where should they go? And before I ask you to answer that, I also want to give a shout out to my friend and peer consultant, Shireen Jajawigrama, who suggested that I seek out an interview with you. And I'm so glad that she did. So back to that question, where should people find out more about you? Where can they be in touch with you, Hazem?
Can I also thank Shireen for connecting us? That was definitely a lovely thing, and I want to thank her as well and shout out for her as well.
Yeah.
But I prefer to be. I hope that we can connect over LinkedIn.
Okay.
With my LinkedIn profile, I think that will be the place that I hope that I can connect these people and enter into conversations, or if you have questions about our journey or other things, that will be the natural place for me.
Absolutely. And we can easily put that in the show notes. So we will do that. Well, thank you, Hazem, for all your insights. I was so looking forward to this conversation. And I know that you wish to make more contributions in the form of your thought leadership to the sector about this change journey, but also undoubtedly about other dimensions. So I know that our listeners will look forward to that. Dear listeners, if you found this podcast episode stimulating, then be sure to check out some of the other episodes of my podcast. There are several others actually on change management, including the very first 4 episodes when we started in early 2022. So check those out via my website, 5oaksconsulting.org, that is with the number 5, but also on my YouTube channel. And if you subscribe to my email list, you will always be the first to be in the know. And we also write about the sector's experiences with change, leadership, and management skills and lessons learned in the co-authored book Between Power and Irrelevance, The Future of Transnational NGOs. If you're curious about our co-authored book, but not yet ready to buy it, you can access a concluding chapter of us for free on my website. And with that, this is Tosca, and I look forward to spending time with you on NGO Soul and Strategy next time.